got my head out the sunroof. I'm blasting our favorite tunes. I only got one thing on my mind. You got me stuck on the thought of you. You're making me feel brand new. You're more than a sunshine in my eyes. I'm feeling like this might be my time to shine with you, with you, with you. I got my head out the sunroof. I'm blasting our favorite tunes.
Hi, welcome to In the Middle and Out of the Box, episode 16. Today we're going to do a very serious subject, which is Sargassum seaweed and how it really can affect our area. And it's getting to the level that it's actually pretty much a danger to sea life and also has some implications to humans. So we're going to get into that in today's episode. But first, I just wanted to do a quick update about what happened at Gumbo Limbo. I wrote out a very long paragraphs about what happened in Delray Matters. So if you want to take a look at that on Facebook, basically it's been in the Sun Sentinel, it's been in a lot of things. There's a lot of conjecture, but basically the turtles will be coming back. They're just temporarily in other places until a permit holder is back in Gumbo Limbo. These changes were all along planned to change from Friends of Gumbo Limbo to the Coastal Stewards so that the turtles could actually get more of what they needed. They're increasing, their health issues are increasing, the financial burden is increasing. So as a city, it's very limited to what they can and can't do as far as fundraising and budget items and things like that. So putting it in the Coastal Stewards' hands will give them the freedom to give the turtles what they really need. So this was the plan all along. Unfortunately, I guess some of the staff, weren't happy with the changes, and those staff left, and they were the permit holder to allow the turtle rehab to exist. So I know that there's a search underway to get more staff there that has the permits to be able to have a turtle rehab there. And as soon as that happens, they will be returning. The turtles are coming back. If you didn't see my episode 12 or 12A, they're alive and well at Gumbo Limbo. They're building the tower. I actually have the designs or projected designs in that episode for the new tower, which are fascinating. They're making it ADA compliant. They're also putting in that new, as I mentioned in the podcast, if you watch it, putting in the new seawater water system to Gumbo Limbo that's actually under A1A and going to be pulling in actually ocean water. And so all of this is happening. It's very exciting. No fear. They're there. They're well. They're coming back. And everything they had done was actually for the benefit of the turtles. So again, that's the issue. There's no issue. It's good. So I just want to make sure everybody understand what was going on. And I've gone to Gumbo Limbo for over 20 plus years with my children as they were growing up, and it's a beloved gem of Boca Raton, and we all love it. So I can understand why everybody was so concerned and worried. But they will be back, and they're just as good as new. So, all right. So let's move on to Sargassum seaweed. So this is a pretty serious topic. And, I figured, let me break this down, right? Let's try to break it down because it's a little complex. So I'm going to try to go through this as quickly as possible, but it's really important to know what it is, right? So let's start with, well, what is Sargassum, right? It's actually a brown algae. It's found throughout the temperate climates or tropical oceans of the world. It's usually in shallower waters around coral reefs. The Atlantic Ocean Sargasso Sea was named after the algae by the Portuguese sailors because it has so much there. It's just compounded there constantly. So it was named after them. The scientists are currently projecting, based on their calculations, that it's going to be hitting Florida within the next month or so, month or two. And again, they said usually it starts in the Keys and it gets taken up by the Gulf Stream on the east coast of Florida, and then some will also go into the Gulf Coast. But again, a little deviation here and there. Everything can go east, everything can go west. No one really knows. So at this point, count on Sargassum coming here. And so currently, the large mass that can be seen from outer space is roughly 5,500 miles long, which is pretty long. Florida is only 500 miles long and 160 miles wide. So this is a pretty massive amount of Sargassum seaweed. And so the question comes to, why is it increasing? So the scientists have very clearly stated every year, year after year, there's more and more sargassum. It might not always come here necessarily, but there is increasing amounts every year. And they're contributing that to we're using more fertilizer, we're burning biomass, we're cutting down forests, and we're increasing the wastewater from cities, which sends ammonia and nitrates and phosphates into the river systems, such as the St. Lucie River. You also have the Lake Okeechobee releases, right, which are causing a whole another subset of problems as far as water quality. You also have East Coast and West Coast issues from these types of wastewater that are going into the river systems in Lake Okeechobee, which is on the West Coast. You have red tide, which is very prevalent right now, and then you have on the East Coast, you have the sargassum, right? So both coasts are affected by this. And so basically, those elevated nutrients then shoot out and are dispersed over the surface of the ocean, acting as a fertilizer for the sargassum patches. So it's actually breathing life into these sargassum algae. It's actually giving it what it needs, the nutrients to expand and grow and grow and grow. So again, globalization, climate change, man, pesticides, all the stuff that's coming, wastewater from urbanization is happening, right? Which we all know. Every year, our record temperature gets higher and higher down here in Florida. Every year, the sargassum is going up and up and up. So that's why it's increasing. So what I'm going to do is I want you to actually hear from a scientist, local scientist from FAU, who specifically spoke about the current concern about the 5,500 mile long sargassum patch that's out in the ocean. And he's from FAU here, very local, and I wanted to make sure that you got to hear from a scientist today. So I have a little video clip. He was being interviewed just, I think, yesterday or the day before, and very current. And take a look at this, and then I'll come back to you.
Brian LaPointe is a research professor at Florida Atlantic University's Harbor Branch Oceanographic Institute, and he joins me now from Fort Pierce in Florida. Appreciate you being with us.
Well, thank you for the invite.
So, a massive blob of seaweed spanning 5,000 miles is heading straight for the Florida Gulf Coast, so vast, in fact, that it can be seen from space. When do you expect it to hit the coast? And what might this signal for the critical spring break and, of course, the summer months ahead?
Well, the so-called blob of seaweed is this seaweed floating sargassum in the tropical Atlantic Ocean, and that is what we call the Great Atlantic Sargassum Belt. And that sargassum seaweed is moving towards the west and will proceed to move through the Caribbean and up into the Gulf of Mexico and South Florida area in the coming months. And we typically get the peak of that seaweed arriving in Florida around midsummer. July is usually when it peaks.
Yeah, I think I've been there when it's arrived. So why are we seeing such a massive blob of seaweed at this time? What's causing it? And how big a threat does it pose to residents and to sea life?
Well, this is an unusual year in that this sargassum bloom in the Great Atlantic Sargassum Belt started early. It doubled in size between December and January. In 1 month, it doubled in size and was larger in January than it has ever been since this new region of sargassum growth began in 2011. So this is an entirely new oceanographic phenomenon. Previously, the Sargasso was in the Sargasso Sea to the north. That is the central gyre of the North Atlantic Ocean, and would circulate in the currents around that, as well as through the Caribbean and the Gulf of Mexico. So this is a whole new thing. And this is the source of this sargassum seaweed that is creating such a problem, really a catastrophic problem for tourism in the Caribbean region, where it piles up on beaches up to 5 or 6 feet deep on the beaches in some places. In fact, In Barbados, just last week, they reported they need 1,600 dump trucks a day to clean the beaches of this seaweed to make it suitable for tourists and recreation on the beaches. And where it comes ashore in the mangroves, it comes in such large quantities that it basically sucks the oxygen out of the water and creates what we refer to as dead zones. These are normally nursery habitats for fisheries, and once they're devoid of oxygen, we have lost that habitat. They
Right.
are also harmful to seagrasses and coral reefs, and obviously to human health as well, because when they rot, they release toxic hydrogen sulfide gas. They have a high concentration of arsenic in the tissue. So you have to be very careful when you clean the beaches and try to reuse this for fertilizers or some other beneficial use.
So, what solutions are available to stop these massive seaweed invasions? Is there anything that can be done to disperse or break it up, or do we just need to do what you've suggested, basically taking away truckloads of this seaweed?
Well, at this point, that's all we can do. Efforts are being made in the Caribbean to construct booms to hold it off the beach and to get harvesting boats to run along those booms and harvest it into barges where then it could be taken either to land to a suitable disposal site and dried and perhaps used for some purpose, or a new project is looking at actually harvesting it at sea and sinking it to the bottom of the ocean. And in that way, sequestering carbon that is, used by photosynthesis in the seaweed, sending it to the bottom of the sea where it will be buried, and in that way, sequester that carbon to kind of chip away at the CO2 buildup in the atmosphere.
Brian Lapointe, thank you so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thank you.
So hopefully you understand and how this is going to affect us now after watching that clip and understand the severity of this and the concern. Here's some pictures from 2018, which supposedly was one of the worst years. Again, every year it's getting worse. But it started much earlier this year. This is February 2023. And it's just compounding itself, again, because of the nutrients it's being fed from, all the things we described already. So it is very concerning. One of the problems is that too much of anything is not good, right? So we always have people, which is true, that say, sargassum is good for the turtles because they are able to go out on it. I know they go out there, they think it's 3 miles offshore. They stay out on this sargassum mat or seaweed that they find for like 3 years. It's nutrition for them. It gives them safety. There's also lots of sea animals that live in the sargassum. There's a lot of plankton for other animals or mammals. And so it is very, very good necessarily for the marine life. But too much of anything is not okay, right? So we have excessive blooms, and they're contributing to the decline of the coral reefs. It's dangerous for wildlife by smothering the turtle nests. Okay, the turtle nests cannot climb over. When you're 3-4 feet deep of sargassum, the little baby hatchlings cannot, and they wind up dying. Out in the ocean, if you have a 5,500-mile path of sargassum that's just floating out there, this mass, the dolphins can't come up, and we have dolphins off our shore all the time. I see them. They can't come up to breathe. The mammals, the whales, and so forth. So it's entangling dolphins, whales surfacing to breathe, and also it even is a threat to human health, which I'll get into in a moment. It also negatively affects the mangrove habitat. It actually depletes the oxygen out of the water in the mangroves, which is really very crucial to Florida, which is our nurseries and is home to many, many species. So getting back to humans, so the gas that rotting algae produces is hydrogen sulfide, which is a toxic gas. And you can cause respiratory problems and damage, right? So you have to be very, very careful if you have a lot of sargassum on the beach and you're doing a beach cleanup, or if you have prolonged exposure. This is one of the concerns that there is out there also as far as human health too. So here is a actual picture of a turtle that was smothered in the Sargassum. This is up in Palm Beach, and so it's very local. And massive seaweed infestations are killing sea turtles and befouling beaches across the Caribbean and Florida. And scientists are saying this is just the beginning. If you've seen from afar, the bloom looked like a coppery oil spill slicking the sea, but a closer look revealed dead wildlife entangled within it. So this is when, again, it's good for up to a point, and then it becomes not good, right? And actually a danger to the sea life and so forth. So we have to really make sure we can take care of this because this is only increasing and getting worse each year. So what's everybody doing about Sargassum, right? So this isn't just about a show about problems. I always have solutions, right? So the first thing I thought of is, well, let's call around. Let's find out what some towns are doing. Let's see if anybody's being proactive here. So I spoke with Mark Almy from Parks and Rec in Fort Lauderdale. And he is the only one permitted in the state to do what they're doing down there, which I found fascinating. So basically, he has numerous cities coming and visiting him. And basically, what he does is he has his own internal beach cleanup crew and trucks and so forth, tractors and dump trucks. And what they do is they take the Sargassum off the beach. They have a conveyor belt that brings it out off to the dump trucks that are on the asphalt, and then he takes it away. And they're actually doing 500 yards a load, and they do roughly about 300,000 yards a day. And so what they do then is they bring it to an acre plot of land and they spread it out and they let it dry for about 90 days. And then it actually, he says, turns into dirt. It actually breaks down and turns into a brown dirt. And they actually use that dirt all throughout the city to fill in wherever they need to have fill, we're in the medians, plantings, wherever. So they always have a huge supply of this dirt, which is fantastic because it's saving them $300,000 to $500,000 a year in dumping fees of dumping this Sargassum, and instead they're actually naturally recycling it. So it's a fantastic idea. They have the permit. It's a well-oiled machine. When I spoke to him, he was more than happy. He offered me a tour of the facility, a tour of the process. I called some of the local cities and I told them, I said, hey, here's an opportunity to learn about this. And Mark had mentioned, though, that, a lot of the cities come and then the first thing they say is, oh, well, there's an outlay of cash. We have to buy trucks or dump trucks, or we're currently paying for a third-party vendor to clean our beach. Well, okay, so you might need to change that, right? So, so the whole point is yes, there's an initial outlay of capital to purchase to one or two tractors, depending on the size beach you have, some dump trucks, and obviously one or two staff to take care of this internally. But then you have a system, right? You have a system in place to take care of the Sargassum. So I was very impressed with Fort Lauderdale, very impressed with the fact that they were so willing to have people come down, and they say they have them down all the time to show people how to get this done and do it right. He mentioned a couple things too. He said that a lot of the other cities are burying it, right? Which we know they're doing, right? I know Delray does that. I know that Highland Beach does that. I know that Boca does that. Okay, and there's really some real bad, serious consequences to that. First of all, there's thousands of pounds of nanoplastics that are going into being buried. When the beach rakers or the tractors come by and they turn over the sand, they're actually just burying it under the sand, and it's just plastics, right? So the beach is becoming more and more full of these plastics. And when I mentioned it to one of the representatives from the town, they said to me, well, you can't really see it. There's just a couple pieces of plastic. I said, nanoplastics are really kind of invisible, right? They're very microscopic. It's what gets broken down, especially when these tractors are going over this plastic constantly over and over, re-burying it. It's coming up again, re-burying it. It's just breaking down this plastic, and it's not good for the environment. It's not good for us. We breathe it in. So again, that's one component which is really unhealthy for us and the environment. And then the second part of burying it is it winds up with, he mentioned something called a skeleton beach, right? So you have different stages of decomposition. You have an uneven beach. You have sinking spots. You have not that smooth stable beach. So it's just really not a good idea to keep burying organic matter that's decomposing like that, because again, you have all different stages. And so also, he mentioned that because it does break down to this tiny, tiny granular stage of, basically they call it dirt, it turns the beach brown, right? So he says a lot of times further up in, Boca Del Rey and so forth, the beach is more of a brown color. And he said in Fort Lauderdale, they really try to keep the beach more white. So again, that's just a subset of this, but that's not the most important thing. But the most important thing is the nanoplastics and the unevenness of the beach. So if he has a better way of doing this, which it sounds like it is, I mean, I would think that other cities find an acre parcel of property in your commercial zones, manufacturing zones, and use this method. It sounds fantastic. It's a naturally recycling process. I mean, what could be better than that, right? So again, initial outlay of capital, but again, penny wise, pound foolish, right? We got to look beyond that and look at long-term strategic planning, right? So here's a great example of Fort Lauderdale. Okay, a homeowner sent this to me. This was his cleanup from 4 days in front of his beachfront home of plastics. And then he mentioned also that the tractors just keep running over the plastics and breaking them down and making them into smaller pieces, and then they just keep getting reburied and reburied. And so it's just a cyclical problem with burying the trash. That's not really the way it's supposed to be handled, according to DEP. Here's another example of that. This was after a storm, and I don't know if you can see, but there's actually layers of garbage that are buried. And so basically what happens is it turns into almost an archaeological dig here, where you're seeing layers of garbage. And if you really think about that, that's pretty sad, right? Because that's going to be there for hundreds of years. And we need to make sure we take this off the beach, right? So not just reburying garbage and plastics. So here is an example of a beach right here locally in Delray, Boca, and Highland Beach, where they're burying the sargassum, and you can see how it's kind of uneven. It looks like they didn't really do a good job there. Here's another example of that, where you have these huge tire ruts and everything else. It's very uneven. Okay, so then I said, well, let's look at another city. What are they doing? So I called the town of Palm Beach, right? So the island of town of Palm Beach. And I said, what are you guys doing? Now, I have to say I was very impressed by the town of Palm Beach. Spoke to Rob Weber, very helpful. He says that they worked with Fish and Wildlife, they worked with DEP and Palm Beach County to get a pilot program in place with two options. And their first option, which was their first preference, is they're putting all their excess sargassum seaweed along the Palm Beach North Jetty, covered with a thin layer of sand. So it's going to be along the rocks and the jetty, on the sides, and basically the natural bashing of the waves along the rocks and everything is going to break this down back down to that granular level that they're looking for. So it's going to be almost like a natural recycling of the seaweed. So they worked with them. They were approved to do this. And then if it becomes so excessive that the jetties themselves get overwhelmed, they do have another option, which they don't want to do, but in case they have to, is where they would be digging a large swimming pool size of hole in the north end of town, filling it up with seaweed, and basically making sure that there's at least 2 to 3 feet of sand on top so that turtles could still naturally nest and not know the difference. But again, you have the decomposition issue there, so they prefer not to use that method. So they're thinking that this jetty pilot program is going to be very successful. And what I was so impressed with about them is they are prepared. They did their homework. They sought out solutions. They were proactive. They worked with other agencies. They have all their POs signed. They have the contractors already hired. And they're just basically standing on standby. So as soon as that sargassum starts coming along the shoreline up there, they are ready to go. There's no delay. There's no, oh, we have to hire someone. Oh, how do we do that? Or who do we go to? Or how do we get the money? Or how do we... So again, this is already tied up in a bow, ready to go. Great proactive work and effort. Very, very impressed with the town of Palm Beach and also Fort Lauderdale. So here's a little bit of where the jetties are that they're talking about. They're going to try to deposit some and then cover it with some sand. Okay, now I spoke to Boca Raton, Kevin Beckham, and his staff, again, they have an internal, they don't hire third party, does the beach cleaning and the raking. They do bury the seaweed. And when I asked him what his plan was for excessive sargassum that we're expecting any moment here, he said they didn't really have a plan. He did, he was saying that they were thinking about maybe doing some type of barrier system, possibly, but they haven't settled on that out in the ocean. But he didn't really have a plan, and I guess he asked me about, well, hey, what are other towns doing it? I explained to him that I've talked to several other towns and what they're doing. So he was really looking for some ideas, and I have to give him credit, that he was willing to ask me that question. Hey, what are other towns doing? And I always go back to this because I always say, when you have a good idea and you have something that's really working, the town should be sharing these ideas instead of just recreating the wheel constantly in your own town and everybody doing their own thing. Obviously, you might have to modify or adapt it to your town. I get that. But here's a great situation where this person, that's in charge of this was saying, hey, basically, do you have any other ideas? I mean, what are the other towns doing? Tell me, please. So I shared with him, and we actually came up with the fact that actually that jetty pilot program might actually be a really good idea for Boca because Boca has the Boca Inlet. So they have jetties on both sides. So, again, he was going to look into it further and contact the town of Palm Beach. But, unfortunately, at this point, it doesn't seem like they're really prepared in case it does start coming on shore. So that's something they probably want to move on pretty quickly. I also had spoken to Del Rey, and Del Rey doesn't have any plans. They don't have anything in going. They were going to just leave everything alone and not do anything, which I kind of explained to them that other towns, what they're doing, and that this is going to probably be a really big problem. They're talking about like 3 or 4 feet deep for the length of the beach and so forth. And that a lot of the towns are taking action. So I put him actually in touch with Mark Almy from Fort Lauderdale. So I think he's going to take a tour, Del Rey, and they're going to take a tour down there to see if it's something that Del Rey can maybe do. But again, up until my phone call, I don't think anybody really thought about this because it doesn't seem like anybody's doing anything, so I don't really know. But anyway, in Highland Beach, Highland Beach is another issue. Highland Beach, same thing. They bury their seaweed. They actually do not do it internally. They actually hire a third-party vendor, as does Del Rey. And there's a lot of problems with a third-party vendor. Those tire tracks and everything that you saw in there is by a third-party vendor, right? So when you not have an internal staff in your own town that cares and so forth, and it's just somebody you're hiring, usually the outcome is a little bit different. When I was vice mayor of Highland Beach, I tried very hard to get our own internal beach cleaning tractors and process going. And I actually had put this before the Natural Resource Board. They discussed it, they approved it, they brought it up to the commission. The commission just kept shutting it down. And as we all know, one vote doesn't work. So and the reason why they kept shutting it down was it was the same thing. It's that initial outlay of capital to get that tractor or tractors and the 1 or 2 dump trucks you might need. That initial outlay of capital scares a lot of towns. And, again, this is only going to be a problem that's just going to continue to get worse and worse and worse as the years and the temperatures continue to climb and the wastewater and the nutrients are going out into the ocean. So we better start changing, again, our thinking about, I don't want to spend money on this, but it really is probably a really good investment to do for your town. So whether you want to do a pilot program or whether you want to dry it out and use it as recyclable dirt, that you have a plan and you come up with something, because burying and burying and burying, especially in excessive or massive quantities, is not going to work for very long. So there should kind of be a plan B coming up here very shortly that a lot of these towns, Del Rey, Highland Beach, and so forth, are going to have to do, including Boca also. So hopefully, one of these 3 towns can get it together and start thinking outside the box a little bit. So again, here's some deep ruts and sand that's uneven from the third parties and the vendors that are doing this, and also some towns that are doing it. They're burying it, and you can see there's like large mounds down there further and deep into the picture. Okay, so here's some out-of-the-box ideas, the local solutions that have yet to be done, right? And here's some great ideas. And this came actually from Mexico, because Mexico has the same problem that Florida has, right? They're getting massive amounts of sargassum, and their scientists went and really tried to work with internationally. What can we do with this sargassum? Tell us what we can do. So the sodium alginate, when extracted, is turned into a thickening agent for pharmaceutical products and creams. It's a huge 624 million year market to contract and partner with. So this is something that you can actually sell to pharmaceutical companies, because it's actually an ingredient that they can put into when it's recycled down and converted to this thickening agent. And so these companies look for this. And again, this is something that offsets some of the revenue being spent that you can use to bring it back into the town. So that's one, is to actually contact some pharmaceutical companies. Another potential sustainable business is a biofertilizer. In agricultural industry, they found that the sargassum you can actually use and mix in with fertilizer. So that's another possibility. They also found that by heating the sargassum and filtering it down, that it comes into a concentrated liquid form and can be used as a biostimulant for crops, because it's so nutrient rich, so that when it's actually processed properly, the crops just go crazy. So, I mean, again, this is another great option, especially with farmers that are utilizing this technology, that they could also be sold to. Also, because of its nutrient-rich properties, the waste from the process itself, from this process of heating it up, can be used as a substrate for growing mushrooms, with debris turned into compost and spread onto fields to enrich the soil. So not only do you have this liquid that's used to help agriculture and plants and so forth grow exorbitantly, but then you also have the waste from that can be put onto mushroom plants and mushroom farms that makes and used as compost for them. There's also a potential commercial use as a corrosion inhibitor for oil and gas pipelines. Compounds found in sargassum are effective and similar to those that prevent corrosion in water heaters and could stop steel pipelines from being damaged, right? So there's so many different, these are the things that they came out with after they're studying this, and they actually found that there's so many different uses for sargassum rather than just burying it. And again, so we need some towns here to kind of think out of the box. We have Fort Lauderdale doing their natural recycling, turning it into dirt. We have the town of Palm Beach doing their natural recycling, having it on the rocks and being bashed down into a granular form. And then we also have a way for these towns to make revenues, right? So here's a whole bunch of solutions that they could be doing right now, and contracting with each one of these to offset the expense of pulling the sargassum out and doing something with it. So again, these are great ideas, and I'm looking for some towns to take it and run with it. So here is, we're going to go into science and technology. And I wanted to, since we're on the topic of turtles, I wanted to show how hard people are trying to help and care for these turtles. You know, a turtle is exhausted by the time it climbs out of the nest, and then it has to get all the way to the ocean. It's got to bypass all the predators trying to get it, the crabs, the seagulls, everything. And then it gets to the ocean, and hopefully it will be okay for a little while until it gets out to that sargassum patch. But here's an example of a little turtle that was so tired, they actually were cutting and trying to dig out a pathway for it to walk, so it didn't have to go over all the bumps and everything to get to the water. And so it was a really successful outcome. So I just thought it was nice, and it was appropriate to what we're talking about today. And so here's a video, a real short one, to make you feel good. Okay, and then this I saw was really interesting, right? It's a translucent octopus. But what's so fascinating about this is that you can actually see its brain. So it was like really interesting. So I was like, wow, I have to show this to everybody because I don't think people realize really what's out there. So this is another interesting creature. I know I showed that really rarely seen jellyfish a couple episodes ago at the end, and it was fascinating to me that most people have never seen that jellyfish. It's very elusive. And so, anyway, when I saw this, I thought this was kind of neat. Okay, so this week's art is really kind of exciting. They were redoing this old chapel, and they found behind this picture another mural that was hidden for hundreds of years. And so I just have this little video clip, very short, and so I thought you'd be interested in seeing this for art this week. Take a look. Okay, and then I did mention that anytime I see a house or a building that was restored back to its full potential, I was going to make sure I put it on here. So I just happened to come across this beautiful Greek Revival home that was redone and put back to its original splendor. And it's amazing how the house basically was just a shell. Everything had fallen apart, the original porch, the Greek elements, and so the chimneys, and it was put back. And it's just kudos to them. You know, like I said, I want to see more of this. So I just wanted to share that with you. Okay, and then what we're going to do this week is we're going to end again with a couple of pictures of mine. I'm still digging through, so I found two more that I'd like to share with you. And I guess that's it. If you have any questions, you can reach me at inthemiddlebdh@gmail.com. I'd love to hear any comments, questions, feedback, any suggestions on topics that you'd like to hear. I'm all ears. I'm here for you. And enjoy your week, and we'll see you next time.